So I think we will get started. Welcome everybody to our first webinar of 2021. We're so happy to have everybody here as we peer into what's ahead, including consumer aspirations and retail trends and just general vibrations out there. We have a great panel of experts today. Tom Mirabile, who is the founder of Springboard Futures and consumer trend forecaster for the International Housewares Association. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Owen. Thanks for having me.
Good. We got Greg Petro, founder and CEO of First Insight, which specializes in data-driven decision-making and experience creation powered by predictive analytics. Thank you for joining us, Greg.
My pleasure.
And friend to all in the home textiles industry, Buxton Midyette, Vice President of Marketing at Supima. Happy New Year, Buxton.
Happy New Year, Jennifer. Great to be here.
Okay, and to everybody who's taking part, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Just lob them in through chat or the Q&A. All right, let's get going. I think there's a broad consensus that the pandemic maybe created a couple new trends, but basically turbocharged a lot of trends that were already in place. And I'm going to ask each of you, was there any particular change that surprised you? And Greg, I'm going to lob that your way first.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think that, obviously it is absolutely true that COVID accelerated sort of known trends in the industry. The movement online, work from home would be two of the big trends I think that everyone's familiar with. And even the concepts of buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, etc. All of that I think was maybe not as much of a big surprise, but it certainly was a lack of preparedness. And that's just simply because who knew that this was going to happen at that rate? Having said that, though, I think Doug McMillon said it best in a CNBC interview early on in, maybe it was March or April, where he was walking through how consumers' purchases and desires for products changed month to month. And his example was, who would have known people went from, staples to bicycles. And then further down the chain of their decision making. And I think for us at First Insight, what we saw that was surprising was the dynamic nature of the decision making in response to the decisions that we had to shut down, but how the consumer reacted. And some companies were able to be agile enough to address it and continue to be successful, and others weren't. And I think it's that anticipatory piece where we saw successes.
Tom, what surprised you?
I'll agree with Greg. I think there were a lot of things like working from home that were turbocharged, and there were certain people who did a great job of responding to that. I think what surprised me really was how many important shifts were driven by consumers' emotional needs, and how unprepared a lot of industries were to look at that. I mean, if you, a great example is like holiday, okay? Demand for holiday at retail started over a week earlier this year, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, and stores were out of stock. Now, great, you get your margin, you don't have to worry about markdowns, but you're sitting out of stock 2 weeks before Christmas, so and I think that we should have seen that coming, or some retailers should have seen that coming, because we were 3 weeks into the pandemic and people were putting Christmas lights up in their windows. A holiday for Halloween started earlier. So, I think, again, to what Greg said, a lot of it is responsiveness. I think the home textiles industry has really leaned into it more intuitively than most. Weighted blankets, those started trending in 2018. But the industry was like, get off the bench. It's time for you. Comfort's in, and I think that certain industries really hit it,
Yeah. I thought you mentioned weighted blankets. If you looked at the Black Friday, which started for many like 2 weeks ahead of time in the home textile spheres, weighted blankets, whether you were looking at Bed Bath & Beyond or Big Lots, that was key item.
It was one of Google's top 20 gifts this year. And you were the one, I just realized this, you were the one who said, you got to try these weighted blankets. Well, thanks a lot. It turned me into pretty much of a basket case for about a week. I couldn't even get out of bed, so
I was a skeptic. What could I say? I was
I
wrong.
was with you.
Yeah. Buxton, what surprised you as things unrolled?
Yeah, I think it was really the response of the industry in terms of holding together in the supply chain that would they these enormous changes, enormous restrictions, very dynamic changing situation every 5 seconds. There's a new piece of information, you had to recalibrate your whole outlook and plan. But I was really impressed with how responsive the industry was in holding together the supply chain and keeping staying working. And I think, we have a lot of big players out there, and I think they had their thinking caps on and did a great job of, keeping the supply chain going, and that we didn't have massive stockouts. I mean, I know as one who just had the misfortune of a dishwasher breaking down after 15 years of good service. Trying to go find a dishwasher right now. You just pray that yours just keeps going, because it's like there are none to be had. You cannot find one. And I could easily envision that with home textiles, that we could have. There's so many points. It's such a complex industry. There's so many points at which you could have had a complete and utter breakdown in supply, but that did not happen. And I think it's a real tribute to the industry that it kept at it and kept working through all this.
Well, and that's a good point, because really there are three main countries for the bulk of home textiles: China, India, Pakistan. And they all went down and came back up at different times and to different degrees. So it was crazy patchwork. Plus the fact that a lot of retailers yanked back all of their orders before suddenly we had this online boom, right? And then everybody was scrambling again. Greg, you had mentioned lack of preparedness, some lack of preparedness in some places more than others. Can you talk a little bit more about how retailers were or weren't set up for that boom and what their priorities should be this year?
Sure. We were fortunate in that we started to anticipate, based upon some of our customers in Asia, in China, the idea of some of this crisis percolating. And we started to survey consumers on an industry-wide and local level to understand how trends may change and if this thing were actually going to transpire. So it's been curious to watch consumer behavior in anticipation of the next phases. What we saw and what we have continued to see is one trend that we do not believe is going to sort of moderate itself back in any way, shape, is the desire from a consumer's perspective to purchase online every product category. And to give you a statistic that I found shocking, its desire has increased 142%. Now, you could say, well, once we get the vaccines rolled out and life goes back to some sort of normalcy, that behavior may moderate. But I guess we'll talk a little bit about that concept at some stage around whether store balancing is the right scenario. But from our perspective, from the consumer behavior point of view, their preference has shifted, their behavior has shifted permanently online, much like we're seeing the desire for employees to work from home. And that, I don't think, is going to moderate itself back. And I think while we weren't, I have to give our industry and all segments credit for the fact that they were agile enough to shift their behaviors and respond. But as I mentioned, this change in behavior is increasing, not decreasing. So if people think that the environment of retail is going to go back to some predictable nature, I think the challenge that we can anticipate into the future for this year for sure is one, you can't use last year's history or even 19. So now what are we going to do from a forecastability perspective? And then the second piece is you have the dynamic nature of the consumer that our data suggests they're not going to change that behavior of basically pivoting on a dime anymore in their decision making.
And Tom, what are you?
It's funny. I think one of the silver linings was that a lot of consumers were kind of, boomers in particular, were kind of forced to face down a certain tech aversion to buying every category, as Greg pointed out, online. And I think that this has tamped down a lot of that, in terms of just learning how to shop, being more comfortable with the process. It seems primitive, but it's true. And I agree, especially since that growth happened predominantly in boomers. We learn things and we stick with it. I know how to do it now. I'm doing it that way. And frankly, I love being at home. So, it's like, it's one less thing I have to go out and expose myself for. And, and then we can talk into the ongoing fear that the pandemic has caused, regardless of whether or not it ends. But I think for me, one of the things that, I think I was really surprised at how retailers responded, and with great alacrity. But a lot of the shifts that we saw last year were tactical. Address employee and consumer safety, address consumer concerns, service issues, supply chain issues, and where it was possible. But what's really has to be addressed this year is the experiential issue. And I'm not saying, as American consumers, we have the shopping as an experience. Whether it's social or individual, it is an experience. And right now, that has to be addressed. Retailers have to refresh and reinvent the experience, not necessarily recreating an in-store experience, but meeting those joy points that the brick and mortar consumer experiences. I mean, I'll give you an example. Bloomingdale's, okay? Not the first person you think of when you think of like addressing this with flexibility, but they immediately started doing, what's trending on their homepage. And you click that, there's a pull down for leather, and you go there and it's everything that's hot in leather right now. Warby Parker. Warby Parker is eating this up. I can try on 5 pairs of glasses, see exactly what they look on me. It has, in essence, either replaced or enhanced the store experience. So, I think that we really need to look at how are we reinventing the online experience. We've dealt with the tactical things now.
So I'm just curious, because between the two of you, is it the online experience that needs more recreation or the in-store experience? Because we're still not sure how many stores we need to end up with, or is it both? And do they need to be unique, or are we still figuring that out?
I think it's both, but I think, I think that now it's going to be less about recreating an in-store experience and creating an entirely different online experience. It's a new medium. It's not a competitive medium anymore. It's an adjacent medium, and more people are sort of looking at it that way. So,
okay, Buxton, I've got a kind of similar question. You're so plugged into the manufacturing supplier community. How did you see their priorities shift as they adjusted to everything last year? And kind of what sense do you have of where they're placing their priorities for this year?
I think, we saw even before this very memorable year, 2020, we saw already a shift to quality, that we were no longer, like 5 years ago, we were in what I referred to as the battle for the basement, where it was a great competition to see who could be the cheapest. And I think consumers bought that cheap product thinking everything was the same, and they discovered that there is a difference between a cheap towel and a nice towel, and a cheap sheet and a nice sheet. And that trend has only been accelerated by COVID, as people are spending more time at home, and everything they do at home, how can they upgrade that? Because there are a lot of things that people still can't do. and whether I just read an article the other day on wine that people were buying, they might have been in for the $15 bottle, now they're buying the $25 bottle. We don't want to talk about the volume. We know that's higher too,
Yes.
but whether it's they're definitely coming into the home market with an increased appetite for better product.
Well,
And
I can tell you that anecdotally, what we hear from a lot of people, and some of this was driven simply by periods where you kind of out of stock in opening price points, and voila, higher price point products sold. They sold very well.
Yes, and this actually with just speak specifically to Supima, we had a situation where prices were at historic lows because of the dip in apparel demand momentarily. That's come back, but in a way it was a much lower cost for manufacturers to come into Supima and upgrade their product offering to their customers. We're seeing that now subsequently, and the prices have greatly recovered. But I do think the strength of this trend will continue, would be my thought, to continue through 2021 as we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we ain't there yet. And I do think that a lot of the trends will outlive the current situation when we do get back to a more normal situation, to the new normal, whatever that is.
Well, as you were speaking about that, we had a question come in specific to you about the current price of cotton and your prediction for the market ahead. 30 to 40% increase, question mark?
Let's see, I'm looking at that question. Well, it has gone up to, it was around 90 cents, and it was and is now up to around $1.40 landed. So you've seen a significant recovery, which I think, I couldn't tell you what the exact price is going to be, but I do think that there's a strong demand for Supima right now. In both the home and the apparel markets that we've seen our brands do extremely well. I couldn't tell you what, but it does seem strong.
Okay.
At this moment.
And Greg, you did a blog for Forbes recently, and you said that you thought 2021 might be even more unpredictable than 2020. As we fasten our seatbelts to await your answer, in what way do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think that there are aspects that we can all get comfortable with, right? And in the foundation of sort of where we have settled in, which is the consumption of products and technology and services online, right? The challenge with that is, as you think about it, is the switching cost from a consumer perspective is nominal to zero, right? And consequently, what that means is they now have had, which we all, I think, recognize from probably 2010 on, control of the environment of their, collecting information, assessing, and making decisions. And now they have the ability to, and have experienced, to Tom's earlier point, online transactions, and are comfortable with it in every age group and demographic group. So consequently now, the question starts to become things like, why would they go back to what we knew as normal? As an example, the productivity concepts of somebody wanting to go and get in a vehicle or get on a train and go to work, or go to a shopping experience, not to have it actually transact. Now, that may be a interesting experience for a brief period of time once we get out of the COVID crisis, but and that's clearly not there until at least June. But the reality of the situation is the consumer's quite healthy and they want things. Just simply think about the concept of the behavior of every individual dynamically changing, and the concepts of micro trends as opposed to macro trends. And that concept alone creates such a high degree of variability. So I believe that the concept of new normal that people need to think about are ways to try to capture and understand on an ongoing basis what the consumer, their set of consumers, are doing and wanting and desirous of, because the other concept is they want it now. They're purchasing today. And the concept of these future things are just not out there. So I think that's the concept that I start to think about in the variability of 20 and 21, which is quite frankly challenging.
Yeah.
So Greg, you just mentioned wanting it now, and that tallies with a question that just came in. But I have another question, which is, could you raise your volume a little bit?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you just mentioned wanting it now, and we have a question to all panelists, but I'll let you start, Greg, because you're talking about wanting it now. Do you think near sourcing will become more important starting this year?
Okay, before I go any further, can you all hear me? I just don't want to over
I can hear you better, definitely.
I won't over adjust my microphone. Okay, so I'm sorry, I lost the question.
The question, you had mentioned people want it now, and we had a question come in for all panelists.
Yep.
Do you think near sourcing will be important now?
So back in 2006, I wrote a paper, and in that paper, one of the trends that I talked about for the next decade, and we missed it, was micro manufacturing near the demand source. I fundamentally believe that we need to have manufacturing near the demand signal in order to respond to it, meaning you're going to have to sense what consumers want, have a supply chain that is nimble enough and fast enough to make it then or very near to then. And the concept of consumer to manufacture is a trend in China that I think is going to just be magnified in a large way in 2021. So absolutely. The question is, can we build it here and in other countries around the world?
That's a big question. Buxton, anybody, are you hearing any rumblings about people
I have.
trying to work this problem?
I have heard of several kind of reshoring, projects, a number of them, but not, under a dozen, under a half dozen. I mean, I think you just have such major producers right now. I don't know that there's a need for more capacity. You have, incredible growth over the past 2-3 years of the major players in the home industry. And I think that they've figured out how to best manage their supply chains and make them as responsive as possible. As retailers have kind of pushed them to hold more inventory, they've had to get smarter in how they manage that. But I haven't seen a big wave. I mean, I think there's room for niche brands to do so, and that is interesting and meaningful. But on a larger scale for major retail programs, haven't seen it yet. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but haven't seen it yet.
Tom, I see your head nodding vigorously at the mention of niche brands. Yeah.
I mean, look, I think the elephant in the room is that the margin issues, the retail price points you have to hit for near sourcing are incredible. Not to mention the production capabilities that exist, just the initial costs of setting all this up. I think what I'm seeing more of is smarter sourcing, where manufacturing side is minimizing the number of parts places, people where things are coming from. So they have 2 or 3 places where parts are coming from for small electrics, where they may have had 15 going into a single item before, a lot like automotive is. I think that, that's going to enable some of the alacrity that's necessary that Greg is talking about, but in terms of near sourcing, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge.
Okay.
And I have seen some in I'm starting to see some in apparel with some of the kind of knitting machinery where you can create custom knits and you can have a custom order and it gets put into, the machine and it will create that configuration, the seamless, t-shirt, whatever it might be, top, dress. But I haven't seen that in for the types of products in home for a towel or a sheet and a wide width. I mean, it could definitely happen, and so you could have custom orders, but I have not seen that yet, for the home industry.
Okay. We got some bunch of questions coming in here. The one I think was pivoting off of the niche, which was what suggestions do the panelists have for small specialty retailers as we progress into 2021? And Greg, everybody's very happy with your sound levels now. Had several things up.
Well, I'm appreciative of that.
So anybody have a thought about some ideas for small specialty retailers?
Let me say this. I think that 2021 has the potential to make small business the next pandemic hero. I think towns love their small businesses. They want to support them. They are like the heart and soul of a lot of towns. They're our main streets, and we all see ourselves in a way as at some point we dreamed about being a small business owner. There's also been there are a lot of financing options opening up as well, but I think that the ability to respond to trends, to consumer needs, to some of that moment to moment living in the now that Greg was talking about lives in small business. That flexibility is something that is quite unique, and I think that, I don't know if any of you have seen, there's a show called, it's being run by Deluxe Corporation, which is actually a financial services company, but it's called Small Business Revolution. It's on Hulu, and it's now in its 5th season, and it's amazing. These people go into small towns and they work with small businesses and tell them how to stay meaningful and how to, be meaningful both online and in their communities. And that sort of interest, it's like they've got over 500,000 Facebook followers. It's just that sort of interest in saving our small businesses is important. The other important thing is that financial institutions are getting behind that enthusiasm. They're looking at making loans that might normally have been refused or challenged. So we've got financial partners on that front as well. And I think markets are another great example. We just covered Atlanta and Las Vegas, and the showrooms there were so many showrooms that were saying, look, we have supply chain issues. If this is not going to be there, let's plan now about what your reorder might look like, so that they're planning in advance of what some of these things, what some of these possibilities are. So I think the support is there, on a lot of different levels, from product to financing.
Okay, another question. There's a lot of movement with all the political turmoil of a lot of people moving out of social media. How is that going to impact retailers' efforts to do digital marketing? How in flux are we there? How permanent is that? Greg, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah. Well, I think that certainly there are, stepping away from the political aspect of it, the concept of people moving away from social media, I think, may be a short-term consequence. The reason I say that is simply this, and I'm not sure about the specific company, but the medium itself of social media has been around since, I think, the beginning of man. We're social creatures, and we use platforms or ways, from party lines that we used to have in AT&T to social platforms today. So there will be the need for people to activate themselves. And think about it, it's been generational. There was MySpace, Facebook, Snapchat now, and it just continues as I, try to keep up on the voluminous nature of that technology. But the reality is the need is there. Now, so the platform's always going to exist in some way, shape, or form to communicate amongst friends and family and other colleagues. The question is how to do it. The more curious point would be this, I think. The consumer behavior to the environment changes. And that's the challenge that I think most companies overlook versus the tactical aspect of how do I get an ad out? And what I mean by that is this. Simply who you place your promotion or you feature or the product or service that you're trying to get across needs to be far more targeted in the sense of understanding what they are thinking at the moment that they are today. So given the political dynamic nature of our environment in the US as an example, behaviors have shifted from one week to another, and an ad going out or a promotion going out or activities and the purchases behind consumers of what they're thinking have changed just based upon those series of events. And so from my perspective, it's going to be, okay, the medium to push it out is whomever's available, if it's Facebook or the next generation, if it ends up happening. But the idea and the concept has got to be, you've got to understand that customer and what happened in their purchasing behavior and decision since that environmental change occurred.
Hmm. How penetrated is shopping via social media? I mean, I still think it's a very small portion, right?
I think there's quite a bit, it depends upon your view of the transactions themselves or the influence to the transactions. So the medium itself is heavily utilized from a advertising and an influence perspective. From a transactional perspective, I think it is still a smaller percentage of the total transactions. But it's much like media spend, right? You really don't know after, that old saying, I don't know which 50%, I think it's Wanamaker said that, of my marketing spend was actually effective. I don't really know if the investments that are being made in social media are not transacting in another way, but influenced through that, even though it may not actually execute on social.
Okay.
I mean, if I can interrupt, I think you have to say that there's always going to be a certain blind aspect to marquee value, but in terms of whether it's going away, I don't know that we'll ever be able to completely distinctly state its value. But a Statista just put out there every minute of the day in 2020. So every minute Instagram posted 347,000 stories. Consumers spent $1 million online every minute. Facebook's 150,000 shares every minute. So it's like, when you Instagram, users posted 347,000 things every minute about other products. So I think that there is especially as we're stuck at home more, I think that it's a mode of communication. It's shared, it's how we communicate with each other. We may not trust corporations as much on those venues, but in terms of what we say to each other, we still rate products, so I think it's still going to be incredibly important.
Yeah. No, I just add to what Tom was saying. I think that, and agreeing with Greg, that this might just be a moment, but I just see an inexorable kind of increase, in this trend, to increase social media, because so much commerce will continue to go online, and social media is a direct conduit into whichever platform, whether it's a brand or a retailer, direct to consumer, that it's just going to get more and more important. But I think, at the same time, we had that question about the small boutiques, small retailers. I think that there is no silver bullet out there, no one thing that you do and you can forget about all the rest, and all the other modes are still very important, whether it's, print, and it might seem quaint, but like there's still a place for that. It's ranking has changed, but experiential and, providing an in-store experience that Casper did, where they had the beds, they're DTC, native brand, but when they developed their stores, they had the, even when they first launched on Bond Street, had, you could go and try out the mattress, and that in a way, like a whole, and it was a different environment than had previously been tried, but really trying to reinvent and creating this experience similar to going to an amusement park, that people come away having done something. I went to this, Warby Parker or Casper, and wow, I had something that they would tell friends about, versus like just going into the supermarket, where it seems very transactional. And I went through my list and I checked all the boxes, versus shopping. That shopping gets transformed into a form of entertainment, that there's an entertainment aspect and a storytelling aspect that really changes how you look at it. Like that you want to go, out shopping, that, in a way the shopping becomes, it's a souvenir of that experience versus the end goal.
We've got another question. The cost of logistics in selling DTC or using platforms like Amazon can be very high. What can be done to offer the experience at a lower cost? Does anybody have any ideas on that front? Greg, you see anybody doing anything different there? Somebody building a better mousetrap that you've seen?
I wrote a piece in Forbes a couple of months back about the tremendous cost of logistics in online business shipping. And I think the recent piece that came out yesterday or the day before regarding reverse logistics, and now I think some companies, Amazon, Target, and a few others, are actually looking at just giving the product away as opposed to the reverse logistics because of the cost of shipping. And I think that people underestimate the idea right now. Online businesses, we already know that the retail as an industry as a whole is very tight margins, right? Generally speaking, on a profitability level. And then you take into account a logistical aspect and it becomes unprofitable. Having said that, and then you take into account that they want it today or tomorrow, right? And then they're going to return it and you're going to pay for it. It's a non-viable business model, in my opinion, and that's what I wrote about. And now we're seeing the aspects of it. So the question is, and I've had friends and family have a sofa delivered, and then, there was some damage to it, and they were like, well, just keep it, get rid of it. I mean, think about this for a minute, right? So in every category, I've seen this in the last 6 months, and I've talked to many people, and I think that here's the thing. A truck, a plane, a train cost a certain amount of money. So there are some fundamentals you just cannot get away from and re-engineer at this point. It can't all of a sudden, Star Trek, beam me up, a product comes to your door. It's not going to happen. So consequently, if you don't have a product that's marginal, that has enough margin, to support it, you have two choices, really. You're either delivering very high margin products and you can afford to make the errors, right? Which we all experienced. I've been in this industry for 35 years. When I was a merchant, you could be wrong, right? When you sold 80% at a higher margin. But the reality is that's not the case anymore. So you have two issues. You have two sides of this sword right now catching up to to our industry. One is you can't be wrong anymore in the products that you bring to market. your error rates have got to decrease tremendously because the working capital has got to be freed up, which means that either people design products and deliver products that are better, meaning whatever that means to the customer, or it's just a matter of time before the capital in the company shrivels up and companies will continue to go bankrupt. That's my assessment of this. It's not a rosy picture, to be honest with you, in my opinion, because I think what online business transition will do is accelerate bankruptcies if companies don't get the products right.
Wow.
Jennifer, can I ask Greg a question?
Sure.
Um, so here's something you don't see in a panel. So I guess one of the things that was alarming to me is what you just mentioned about returns and things that, that's not it's not an inside industry conversation anymore, but showing up on CNN this week. It showed up on a couple of big
Yep.
media. And so what do you think is the likelihood, or do you have any prediction of how or whether consumers will take advantage of that, in a not nice way? I mean, just curious. I mean, is that
Yeah,
something?
I think that there is, my immediate reaction, we were speaking about this yesterday, is that there will be a percentage of the population where this represents an arbitrage opportunity, right? And that's an unfortunate aspect to our industry. I don't think it's a scenario that anybody really wants.
No.
And I think really what it is it's going to filter a lot of businesses to the largest companies who can afford to do it, which is Amazon, Target, amongst others. And it's going to trickle down over a very brief period of time to people's margin, right? Because they're going to have to do the same thing. And the unfortunate part is, for a brief period of time, a large portion of consumers who have that propensity for that behavior, which is unfortunate, just like we see in stores, right?
Yes.
They're going to benefit. And I don't know the percentage, to be honest with you. That's hard to say, but it's going to happen. And it's, if it were even only 5%, this is what bothers me. I mean, our margins and profitability in most companies are so tight that 5% is a breakable model. And so here's the answer, though. I believe what the answer is. I believe that people should be figuring out from speaking to consumers much more closely before they launch products, and as opposed to the old model of launch a bunch of stuff and hope that 80% of it sells at full price, that we got to figure out in the front end before we produce it which products not to bring to market, because then we all know that there's at least 20% of inventory that's completely not needed.
Right.
And so let's reduce it and create demand.
So Tom,
Go ahead.
speaking of consumer demand, you're kind of your theory of the case is consumers have aspirations, they are shifting, and you need to follow those aspirations. What's the aspiration arc? Right.
Well, I mean, what Springboard really focuses on is consumer aspirations. I mean, we take information from a lot of different people, but what I love about aspirations is this: they are more stable than behaviors. A lot of consumer aspirations are things that we've had since our youth, and also they tend to jump across the boundaries of generation or income or social strata. So let me give you an example. We've been working with NPD and the IHA on an ongoing market watch project for about 18 months. And what we did was we identified like 5 consumer aspirations that drive demand across home categories. And those are delivering time, creating space, enhancing experience, of course, supporting wellness, and enabling responsibility. And each one has its own example, its own description, but I won't bother you with that. But let me give you an example. There isn't a person on the street that's not committed. You can't ask anybody who's going to say, wellness is not a concern for me. Okay, pandemic aside, before this all started, whether you're old or young or Democrat or Republican or rich or poor, you're thinking about your wellness every day. And so I think it's easy businesses have to start at that very fundamental aspiration, whether it's when you look at whether you're a retailer or a manufacturer, of course, you have to know who your customer is, who your end consumer is, and that's where the specifics come in and product gets developed into those specifics. The bottom line is you have to start from a foundation of aspiration. And if you do, and you successfully apply your customer to it in your model, then, it sounds ridiculously simple, but you would be surprised how many people spend a lot of time iterating what the competition's doing, iterating what they've seen on Instagram or whatever, or what seems to be a trend, and creating product without really looking at what's at the core of why consumers want it. And again, to Greg's point from before, it's now. There is no new normal. There is a now normal. And if you're really smart, you may be able to figure out the next normal from that, but normal can change in an instant right now. Look at what happened this week. People's sense of security dropped like crazy overnight, and all of a sudden you're seeing, upticks in certain types of security things and so on and so forth. But you really have to keep your ear to the ground, but all of it goes back to aspiration, and what that means. So I think that's kind of something that people just need to really start paying attention to. What is our reason for developing this product? What is this reason for putting it on the shelf? Aside from, nobody needs another freaking potato peeler. It's like, it's got to save me time. It's got to save me space. It's got to say, the more boxes you can tick, the better.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that, just along the lines of this conversation and the challenges that businesses face, on the one hand, the pressure on margins, the challenges within supply chains to keep those functioning, and then on the flip side, the consumer who wants everything right now. I mean, I think that creates an opportunity to, gosh forbid, dare I say, raise prices.
I think, like you said before, it certainly creates an opportunity for better product. I mean, Supima is like, and how many people trade up and don't trade down if they can afford to, So, I mean, but we saw it in 2018, 2019 with cookware, for example. People had to cook at home more. So we saw the average price of cookware purchases go up because people were like, look, I got to use this every day. I want to upgrade, and we see it now in the whole idea of comfort. Comfort is king. And people are saying, I feel like shit. I deserve to feel good tonight. I need to, I need to wait and all those things. So
That's right. And I'm going to treat myself. And they're also, experiencing these, stock outs in so many products, in the way when they find what they want, they're going to buy it, at whatever price. And if you do have to have the story to support it, that why this is so much better. And so, I mean, the retailer, the brand has to do their work in that respect. But I think that there is no ceiling on what a person will pay for a product that they credibly, perceive as being better and is going to improve their life. That I'm going to sleep better on this. I will spend on those sheets. I've spent on the mattress. I'm going to buy really nice sheets. I'm tired of, sandpaper towels. I want, people, if you make a credible case, I think you can charge more. I mean, we've seen that. I mean, look at any of the online players. They're not, DTC brands. They're not competing on price.
Yeah.
Not everybody has to beat Walmart. I mean, that's a mistake. And I think, that we were talking about the revolution and opportunity for small small retailers. I mean, that's, a brick and mortar opportunity. And it's an online opportunity that, in a way, you have these tremendous kind of currents of product that are being poured into the marketplace for your general consumption. But I think there are you look at any market, and there are a lot of different niches, and knowing who you're trying to sell to. I think, Greg, not just some nameless consumer, but thinking who is that consumer? What is their motivation? I think,
that's so important. And I one of the things that we keep telling retailers is, before the pandemic, the whole thing was, we get you. We get you. And that was the message that retailers and brands and everybody had to send, we get you. Consumers don't want to hear that anymore. They want to hear, we are you. We are living what you're living, and we know the solutions you need, and here they are. It's a very, it feels like, you're sort of bearing, you're taking off your armor, but that's what consumers want. You can't fake that. It shows in your product. It shows in just saying, you deserve this. You deserve this tonight. You deserve to wrap yourself in Supima. I mean, it is what it is. We get right now, day to day, through spoiling ourselves. We've seen it in the food industry. We've seen the types of foods people are eating, that type of, indulgence. Indulgence lives in a lot of places. And it's not just about raising prices. It's about you're offering greater value. The value's there.
And the challenge is there are very few, or next to no product categories, I think, where you can react very, very quickly, right, to create a product that speaks to the moment. I mean, Greg, what is your data tell you about shifts going on in trying to predict, what kind of experiences are going to resonate with consumers?
That's a very thoughtful observation. Think about the retail equation in every product category. I think we all understand the business model infinitely well, right? We have to create a product in some way, shape, or form in advance of consumer demand. We have to anticipate it with the lead times that we have based upon the manufacturing of where things are based. And then we have to create all the components and get it orchestrated and deliver it to the store, wherever that store is, online or bricks and mortar or what have you. And we have to see how the consumer is going to respond. That's what we do. And then guess what we do is we react. And that business model hasn't changed since Hudson Bay, I think in 1640 or something like that, right? And we all say to ourselves at various stages, we understand our customer, but the reality is we don't. That's what the data shows. 50% at a minimum of new products, of things we introduce to the market, fail. 50%. That's NRF statistic, MIT Sloan, not First Insight. If you ask First Insight, who is doing about 10% of the global market on new products, we would tell you the failure rate 64%. And the product categories in home are slightly higher. Women's shoes is the highest failure rate. And we could probably tell you by segment and geography. But the reality of the situation is, to your very keen observation, Jennifer, I think, is this. If you have two choices: operate the business model as it exists today, manage your working capital, and become very agile and respond. And I think we've sort of sussed every dollar, penny, cents, pound, whatever you want to call it, out of this system, and keep pivoting to different countries. Move the manufacturing to the demand source, which is what you talked about, right? Which is onerous, or anticipate what the customer wants better. And, that may sound a little self-serving to what First Insight did. We founded the space of digital product testing, but our customers, quite frankly, have been very successful, and organically, product testing has gone up 21%, almost 22% for every one of our customers in their desire to put products in front of consumers in the design phase before they're manufacturing and making these ultimate commitments. And that, I think, is, if you think about it, wow, does it sound, we started doing this 15 years ago, but I think the essence is Zara does it really well since the beginning of that company, right? And what they did was they had a model. Now, they're fragmented too, quite frankly, and challenged because of the situation. But digitally, it represents an opportunity to never go back, which is to basically say, and what I thought when I founded this concept of digital product testing with consumers was that it would handcuff designers into the middle, right? And what we're finding is, because the idea that you can test concepts well in advance, it actually has created a lot more freedom from a design perspective when a designer doesn't have to have that item be successful. They can actually fail fast. So I think your challenges that you brought up is a great one. And I think those are the only three things. You can speed up things, you can respond faster, or you can anticipate better. That's it. So, it seems
I
pretty.
think something, Greg, if I'm paraphrasing you wrong, then please, of course, correct me. But one of the things, Jennifer, that I love about what Greg is saying is that, being reactive has gotten a really bad name over the last decade. Everybody's about being proactive, and it's like looking ahead and ahead and ahead. But being reactive is where we have to live right now. We have to get good at it, and I think product testing is an amazing opportunity for that. But we have to react to what they're living with now, what consumers are experiencing, what problems they have right now. And, the more reactive are going to be the ones who win.
Yeah, I think anything that increases cycles to decision making and anything that is either highly responsive or highly anticipatory are the two things that most companies should be focusing on into the future.
This sounds like a very tall order to me, especially because, it's particularly in industry, I mean, most consumer product industries, but especially the home textiles industry, you have large retailers that have a significant piece of this business, right? And they are all, most of them, very much in flux right now, especially at the department store level, right? So we've got just a couple of minutes for one more answer from each of you. So I'm going to ask a real easy one. What's the biggest opportunity retailers have this year, and what's their biggest challenge? Who wants to jump in the water first?
Take it. I think the biggest challenge is, make listening and responding a core competency. It sounds very squishy, but the bottom line is that there are brands that are surviving and thriving, are the ones that are building loyalty, are listening to consumers and responding to those changing needs. I know it sounds really easy, but it's not, because a lot of brands spend so much of their time concentrating on creating their brand and being true to that, when it's not necessarily relevant to what, to who consumers are. And, I'll give you an example. It's like working from home. Okay. It's just listen to consumers. When you go online and you listen to what consumers are saying about what working at home is like. It's okay. 2 professionals, 2 dogs, 2 webinars going on at the same time, 0 office spaces. You do the math. This is why 8% of couples say that their relationship is not going to survive the pandemic. So what does that mean? What does that mean for product? It means things for product. You go on Amazon and they've now got these, they feature great collapsible desks, about 40 of them, so it's the manufacturers listening and suggesting that to retailers. It's the retailers listening and suggesting that to consumers. For the home textiles industry, it's like we're working on surfaces that we haven't worked on. Somebody's working in the bedroom, sorry, and where's that person sitting? Like, what happened to those great support pillows? What's happened to my posture? All of these things, but it all starts with really being consumer centric and listening. So for me, the biggest opportunity is the gains you get when you really listen. My mother used to say, if you have 2 ears in one mouth, and they should be used in that proportion. That's, I still believe it.
Okay. Buxton, what do you think?
I think really continuing to focus on better quality product is going to be important, and connecting with your customer around that, and sharing that in ways, engaging with them in ways that are very clear, communicating the product benefits. I think that's going to be, I think, one of the keys to success. I think one of the challenges is going to be striking the balance between your online and your brick and mortar business. And what's, do you need the number of stores you have right now? Probably not. What does the experience look like in the remaining stores? How are you going to change? In a way, how do these pieces, because even the DTC, Warby Parker, Casper started out, completely online, have found that it is very useful to have a location, an actual brick and mortar location. And so, even stores that, have that heritage as first and foremost brick and mortar, and have now developed robust online businesses, how are they going to balance those two pieces and how they connect with their customers, and to make them not competing, but in a way complementary, that you could go into that store and you could decide to buy through your mobile device instead of actually picking it up at the store. And that's okay, that you want the sale however they want to buy. You're happy for them to buy through whatever platform, the store, their mobile device, website, whatever it might be. And I think that's a tall order, but that's going to be a big challenge for 2021, is kind of rebalancing your selling platforms to the consumer. But you have to have the product, number one, and it has to be what they want. And I think it has to be a better quality. You have to you're missing out if you're not trying to upsell the consumer and sell them a better product. You're just missing out on that additional revenue and margin.
Okay. And Greg, I'm going to have you get the last crack at this.
Yeah, two quick ones. Stay agile. I think it's a muscle we all learn that we should learn to appreciate into the future, regardless of post-pandemic. It would serve us all well. Two, and not to sound self-serving, so I save it for last, is I agree, listen to your customer. They want to be engaged. They're now at a point where if they're engaging with a brand, people are engaging with a brand or a retailer or a company, they're doing it in a meaningful way. Use a platform, whether it's First Insight, somebody else, but engage with them, ask them questions they want to be asked. We see it. Average time online has increased significantly on our platform with a consumer engagement. And that means they want to be authentically listened to, not kind of patronized, right? Hey, what do you think? I honestly believe that's the future of retail, because it's a very organic way back to the old days of talking to your customer in a store level. So
that's a great analogy. And thank all of you for sitting in and listening to us today. We really appreciate your questions. This session is being recorded and it will be posted up for viewing later if you just want to go back and see it again, or share it with your colleagues and friends. Thank you all. We'll be back next month with another. Have a great day for the rest of your day.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Bye.